Hi, this is Zach Weiner. Many of you may know him from Saturday Morning Breakfast Cereal, webcomic that he does. He also does SMBC theater and has a blog where he will teach you physics and calculus from college. And I don't know what else you're doing. I don't know what you've handed out to the crowd here or what we're in for. You currently have some other sort of experimental project going on here.
Yes.
All right, cool. With that, take it away. I think this is, maybe talk a little bit about yourself, and I think this is mostly going to be Q&A.
Cool. So yeah, I do two other projects. I do Snowflakes, the children's comic, and Captain Stupendous, which is not at all for children. And the new thing I'm doing with Red Pig, other than the books, we have a book out. We'll be debuting at NYCC if any of you are coming. And we have, as you've seen, the world's first single-use gentleman's unlubricated disposable monocle. And I wanted to talk about it because it's really cool just in terms of what it's like to be a creator right now, which is, it sort of started with, as you noted, there's actually a comic that was about this, and the joke was that there was a lady sort of asking a guy if he had protection, and surprisingly, he took out a monocle instead of a condom. And I'm very good at telling jokes live, I should tell you.
Is that in here?
It might be too recent. I don't know. There's a funny thing on that one because there's a point in it where he puts on a monocle and he's just pointing down. That's his indication. And but my voting buttons are under my sharing buttons, so he was actually pointing at Reddit. So I don't know. So Reddit got really excited about that. But it was cool because I had this idea, and then it occurred to me that we might actually be able to make a monocle and a condom wrapper, which would be the funniest thing ever. And so I just put a post on my blog, could anyone tell me how I'm going to accomplish this, because I have no idea. And so, and then I looked into, I got a couple offers from people, they thought they could put it together, and then it occurred to me that it might be smart to try to get it done in a more traditional way. And I started looking into it, and maybe some of you have been to a costume shop and seen you get these little rings of plastic, like black plastic, and it's just, they are really crummy. There's no lens in them. I don't know if anyone's opened one, but it's like an actual monocle. I mean, there's not a proper lens, it's just a piece of acrylic, but so don't try to see with it, and it was also, it wouldn't be very unique, right? I would have felt a little bad, basically buying someone else's product, unpackaging it, repackaging it, and selling it. And so it turned out not only could I not do it, I didn't really want to do it if I could do it. So, and then a guy named Ben Peters, we just met with a minute ago, he's at the Media Labs over at MIT, said he thought he could build these things. And so we gave him the go-ahead, and 2 weeks later he had sent me a prototype, and it's a brass ring with an acrylic lens, and there's even a brass chain on it, which is just magical. And the version I've never touched happily, which he sent me a picture of, was actually lubricated. And the only thing that's sad about it is it actually looked really cool. It had a transparent back, so there was just this monocle floating in jelly. But we figured maybe you don't want lubricant in your eye. I haven't had that experience, but maybe some of you have. But so we made an unlubricated version, which is the one you have, and it's cool because there was this nice way where a whole bunch of us brought different sets of skills together. So I have the stupid idea, that's my skill, and but then Red Pig is handling distribution, and Christina's local, so she was actually able to talk to Ben about how these things are going to come out, and then Ben, who is at Media Labs, knows how to build monocles with press and a laser cutter, and then also how to seal them in Mylar. And then the art is by David Malky. I don't know if any of you know. Yeah, okay. So he does a comic called Wonder Mark. So we wanted to set sort of a Victorian flavor, and he does sort of the essential Victorian comic. And he has this awesome library of real Victorian art that he's turned into vector art, so he can use it for all sorts of cool products. And so we were really able to pull all these different resources at once to make this really cool product. And I'm hoping to do this more. I don't know what the stupid stuff will be in the future, but it's a really cool time now that you can just pull resources this way. So I encourage you guys to do the same thing. with your stupid ideas. And so yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to say about the monocles. I think they'll be out in October if everything goes well. Yeah, so does anyone have any questions? I mostly wanted to do Q&A today.
So does Ben have to hand make all of the monocles?
He was just showing me the process. Essentially, yes, although the way he's working on automating it a little bit so that the lens, for example, is laser cut. So he has it goes through and cuts all the lenses. So that part is easy. And the way he does the rings is by hand, though, but it's not too bad. He just basically has a tube, he forms the ring, ties it off, and then has a little adhesive to seal in the lens. And so it's fairly simple, but it's more complicated than it needs to be. So I'm a little terrified that we'll actually sell out of these, which would be really satisfying, because like my wife completely rolled her eyes about this project. And so and the comic, actually, she was like, "Don't do this, it's stupid." And then when I'm making the real thing, she was like, "Don't do this, it's stupid." So it's a success. I win the relationship. What question was I answering? Yeah, so it's we're a little worried if it sells out. We were just talking this on the way over. We're gonna have to figure out some way to sort of simplify or automate the process. Or the problem is, and this is still the case, if you want like 100 or something, it's not so bad because you can hook up with someone like Ben who can just make these things. Where our original load is going to be 1,000 of them, and if you want 1 million, you can go to China. But getting these sort of intermediate levels is a little trickier volume-wise. You have to kind of figure it out. And we even thought we learned a lot of weird stuff. So we thought we could just send them the monocles, and a condom wrapper company could just wrap them up. It turns out you're not supposed to use condom wrapper machines for anything but condoms. I can't imagine why.
Yeah. They're like, this is a medical equipment.
We'll just process glass on those things.
What?
We'll just process glass.
Yeah,
on those
exactly.
things.
So he's more or less making them by hand, but with the Media Labs, it's a little nicer. Yeah.
So what percentage of your strips does your wife look at and say, "This is stupid"?
She so I have like a secret joke congress that analyzes my jokes before they go to my hand. And, I was going to say the press, but that doesn't make any sense. She's sort of the she's always responds to them. My friends don't have to respond, but she has to because she sees me most nights. So she reads every single joke. She's actually the only one who reads every single joke in advance. And I will. It's nice because when she doesn't like a joke and I do it, I can be like, in your face. And when she likes a joke and I do it and it fails, that's also in her face. So it's really, I always win the relationship. Yeah, she actually, I think through the bonus comics I make it seem like she's always rolling her eyes at the jokes, but I think she rolls her eyes at, she's a scientist, I should say, she has real skills. And so she rolls her eyes at my life. But the actual comics, I think she likes them okay because I was doing them before we started dating, and it while I was dating, it became my sort of test for potential girlfriends because if they couldn't stomach the comic, they probably couldn't stomach me. And so she at least liked them 3 years ago.
Yeah. So who's winning the relationship more?
Who's winning? I'm way ahead.
What if we ask her?
I don't know. Who's to say?
I think the last time we asked her, she was like, "This is not a contest."
She may not recognize me. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if I believe her saying that. That's the kind of thing a loser says.
Talk a little bit about your selection process.
Yeah. So we were really overdue for a book because by the time we started looking through, there were, I think, 2,100 strips. And I was originally going to actually do just 1 through 2100, I was like, I have 10 books worth of material, and I was going through this, and I was like, a lot of this is garbage, and especially the early stuff. You always hate your earlier work, but I do think it's gotten better over time.
How far back does stuff in here go?
I think there are some ones probably from the first weeks of it, but not many. Like I could probably actually track, if you were to look at the graph of how many I pull per month over time, it increases from something like at least 5% to up to 50% on a really good month. And then so I went through and I had Christina and Alexis, who's also from Red Pig, and my wife and a couple other close friends sort of go through and just tack off which ones they liked, and then I interpreted that along with just whatever I actually wanted, and then my recollection of how stuff like, how it had done on StumbleUpon or Reddit, or what people had said about it. And I try not to lean on that too much, because there are comics that are, people like them but they don't link them, you know what I mean? Like some stuff, and then there are comics that people link but don't like. And so I was trying to just get the really good ones, because I was hoping with this book to reach out to people who don't already know the comic. Like ideally it's a book you can pick up and read and laugh at. And yeah, that was pretty much it. It was mostly, there was a little math and hopefully selected the favorites. And it's been pretty well received, I think. I think I've gotten a few people saying you left out my favorite comic, but not too much.
You mentioned jokes falling flat. Where are you gauging? How are you gauging how people will react to your comic?
I probably shouldn't gauge it at all. That's what I'm told. But what I basically do, let me think about that. I know, so I run them by a couple people first, and they actually just give me letter grades, like this is a B-, that sort of thing. And once I run through that, then I put it up, and I think what I probably use to gauge is how Reddit reacts to it, because they're a pretty egalitarian community. They don't have power users. And then how many retweets and how it gets out in Twitter. And there's a little more data you can get through, like looking at your analytics and such, but it is not exactly a science. But you can kind of tell. You can at least tell the ones that have done very well. So I try to actually do a lot of feedbacks. Most people are opposed to that. They think it's sort of a diminution of the artistic something or other. But I think the way you improve is by figuring out what people like. So yeah.
Is it ever the case that one of your reviewers grades something A, another one grades F, and then if so, how does the comic actually do?
I've only ever gotten one F, and that was when someone was mad at me. I won't say who. It wasn't my wife, actually, oddly enough. She's given me D's before, though. Yeah, it's actually very common. What I try to do to marginalize that is I try to make the comic sort of abstract as possible, which is to say, if there's a character who's a dad in the comic, but you might not read that from the visual, I just say like older man or something, And so I try to make it so that the individuals, as much as possible, will just react to the joke and not anything I'm not gathering, because it is scary. And then I have something where someone's like, "This is gold. This is solid gold. You have to do it." And someone else is like, "Nah, C+." And I also you can sort of, after you work with someone for a while, you can learn to find their blind spots, and their inverse blind spots is, I don't have a good word for it, but there's some, like, my wife will always laugh at a biology joke, no matter how crappy it is. And like, I have a friend who's really into Gundam, and he'll laugh at any giant robot joke, so I don't trust him much. I actually think, I don't know if anyone's done this, but you could probably set up a really cool audience feedback mechanism this way. So the way it's done now is you basically hire a bunch of people. Like if you want to see what people think of a movie, you go to your local area, you hire 200 people and get them to sort of grade it. I think it would be a much better system if you set up a sort of market and you said, this person is usually right about this type of movie, and this person's usually right about this type of movie. And when this person says this type of movie is bad, it's actually good, and you could sort of run much smarter math on it. And I've been half tempted to do it on my own little. I think I have 7 people right now. I could probably do this, and then I sort of backed away from it. I was like, this is going to get too obsessive, and I'm not going to be writing my own comic anymore. But someone at some point, if they haven't already, is going to do that. And I think that it would be a really cool project. But yeah, you have to learn to know what kind of feedback you're getting from individuals, because people have really big blind spots sometimes.
That could also be useful data for your readers, though, if they see, oh, this is one that she liked, then.
That's a good point.
you
Yeah,
know,
I can be like, these
usually
are
agree
Kelly
with her, I'll
comics.
read these,
Yeah.
and skip the ones that,
Yeah, I can sort the archive. That's not a bad idea. We're actually working on like a tag system, but I don't know. I kind of like. It scares me the idea that I could say something like, I'm going to just tag all the science comics, and then someone would come through and they would only read the science comics, because I'd like to try. Part of the fun of it is exposing people to new stuff they've never seen, and I would worry that I would be allowing people too much freedom.
that's just how you get them hooked.
Yeah. That might be true. We've actually talked about it. One of the other cool things from a business standpoint is you could sell them to magazines, that sort of thing. Be like, you do jokes only about dogs. I have like 4 comics about dogs, but not yet. Yeah.
Can you talk about your creative process a little bit? Like you just sit in a room and think of hilarious stuff?
I wish. It's not too far from it. What I do is, I was actually just talking to Alexis about this at the wedding the other day because he had some questions. And what my philosophy about doing creative work is this: I think most people think the way you do creative work is that you sort of sit down and try to be creative, right? And I think it really just doesn't work. That's not the way your brain is set up. Your brain is set up to formulate lots of ideas, different combinations, and then a really good creator is really someone who is A, good at coming up with lots of ideas, and then B, editing and shaping those, and picking the bad ones from the good ones, And so it might seem like a small distinction, but I think which way you believe on that question sort of affects the way you handle your workload. So if you believe that just being creative is like a thing you do, you would probably just try to do that a lot. You would sit down and be like, it's creative time. And I think it's really ineffective, and that's why we have these terms like writer's block that I'm convinced is just a made-up term for not doing your homework. And I shouldn't say that really pisses people off. So if you believe that your job is to synthesize ideas that you already have or to come up with new combinations, then what you should do with your time is not try to write, it should be to try to read, try to intake as much information as possible. So on a given day, for me, I spend at least, say, 10 hours learning various different stuff. And for example, I read books that I find boring because it's new information to me. Most people don't because they don't need to. You read stuff you find exciting. So I will read in areas I'm not interested in, and I'll read older books, and I try to read stuff other people aren't reading, and try to read a lot of variety. Like you were saying, I do these calculus and physics blogs, but I read literature and philosophy and history and pretty much I think literally everything. There aren't too many subjects I want to do. I don't do like cookbooks or I don't know fashion or something, but pretty much anything that would make me look snooty at a party I will read. And so I think really what I would say is the creative process is really more about making yourself more interesting, having more of a perspective. You shouldn't try to sort of just cultivate being good at creativity because it's not a real thing. It's it would be a better use of your time. Or I would even say I think the way to say it is the equation for doing good work is not a simple linear equation. You will get more good work done if you spend, say, 15 hours in your day reading and then 1 hour writing than you will spending 16 hours a day writing, because you won't have all those ideas you need to do good work. Yeah.
So at what point in the idea generation process do you say, this is an SMBC idea versus this is a blog post versus... Right. I would say all the projects I work on right now are different enough that the mindset is different. I would say I do believe most of your time should be spent reading, but when I do creative work, usually I sit down to do a particular task. So with SMBC though, so you're still parsing lots of ideas, right? So with SMBC, it would be just trying to come up with literally anything, which is the good and bad of it. Whereas like, if I'm writing a script for something, I have a couple other projects I'm working on that are longer form. Well, I'm doing a Choose Your Own Adventure novel for Bread Pig, and so that's a sort of different process. That's more about being clever, and that's a little, in a sense, it's harder to train. That takes more time, I guess. I don't know. Try to come up with little wordplay and this sort of thing, just writing paragraphs. So yeah, I don't have a lot of. It's not as if I come up with something and then I'm like, where does this fit? It's usually a little more circumscribed. Yeah.
Have you ever heard from Sarah Silverman or her camp?
No, she stole my joke. You're the only one in the room who knows what I'm talking about. She didn't actually steal my joke. I did a joke maybe 5 years ago, and I've been reading for a long time, about nice thing about comics is I can hide behind the paper and not have to tell offensive jokes in person. But here goes. The joke was that you could solve AIDS in Africa by dropping PlayStations on Africa. And then it was weird because I had done this joke, and like weeks later, Sarah Silverman was at she'd done some sort of gaming award show, and she was doing stand-up comedy, and I think it was apparently not liked well because she made fun of video game players. And but she did basically the exact same joke, like we'll solve the crisis in Africa by giving them video games. And so I did this sort of fake me demanding that she remove the joke immediately because I'm the only one who's ever made an AIDS joke. And she never called me back. So no, nothing. But like, a guy did make a fake me and Sarah Silverman dating video, like with clips of her and clips of me. It was really creepy. So that's it. So we basically talked about it. Yeah.
Can you give us like the origin story of SMBC?
I've been doing a thing called SMBC since about 1998 when I was like 16, but it was really a different thing. If you click the archive button on the website, you can actually see some of the really, like, from maybe 2000, 2001, the older stuff which I did, which was a very cliche, like 3-panel friends hanging out sort of comic. It was less cliche then than it is now, but it was pretty cliche then. I think I was doing it just as a joke. Like, I was originally just making fun of Friends, which is why it only has Friends. This was like before I knew anything about webcomics or any of that stuff. And then at some point in college, I figured I could maybe do this for a living, and so I started looking into it a little harder, and I switched to doing single panels because maybe other people write differently from what I do, but the nice thing about writing for characters, right, is you just sort of see what they do, whereas coming up with a whole cloth joke, you have to start from the beginning. But I was finding that I kept coming up with jokes I wanted to do, and no characters could reasonably say them, and so I eventually had a cast of 20 main characters, and it was just not cool. And so I switched to doing single panels, and it was kind of a good lesson because I only had like 200 or 300 readers then, and I still got complaints like from switching format. Like it was the end of my career if I would switch format. And it's stupid because I do meet people they're doing webcomics and they have like just a few readers and they want to switch to something better and they won't do it because they don't want to disappoint the couple people reading, and it's just a mistake to not allow yourself that leeway. But then I actually quit again in college, and then I was working a terrible, horrible job for talent agents in Hollywood. It was really horrible. And I remember very specifically, I had just shown them my comic, and finally, after working there for like 6 months, I had the opportunity. And I remember one of my bosses, who I don't want to say was an idiot, but once asked me, she called me into a room and says, "What is this word punny? What does punny mean? P-U-N-Y." And so she called me into her office to talk about the comics, and she said to me, "The problem with your generation is that you're always starting things and never finishing them. And imagine where you would be if you had done this for 5 years." And I instantly thought I would be anywhere else. And that sounded great. And so as I remember, and I might be mythologizing this a little bit, I think that night I started doing daily updates again, and I basically kept that going. I've missed a few here and there, but pretty much, yeah.
Do you keep a queue like ahead of time? Like how many comics do you keep queued up?
I'm queued up through tomorrow night when I fly home. I normally don't. I occasionally get a little ahead, but I actually like the traditional cartoonists. Some of them are ahead by like a year, which it's cool that they do that. The newspapers need them to do it, but like I feel like that's a good way to not be in tune with like what's going on with you. I mean, I don't do topical jokes, but I feel like you need to be living in your own time. I mean, if you're doing Ziggy, I guess it just doesn't matter. Because Ziggy's still running, I shouldn't say that. If you're doing Peanuts.
How do you tell?
Yeah. But so maybe I'm just excusing my own behavior, but I don't think I would ever want to be more than, say, a week ahead. I'm actually a week ahead this week because of I'm doing stuff on the East Coast, but I do keep a writing buffer, but the actual art not as much, and partially that's because, as you know, I'm doing a lot of projects at once. But also I actually usually get uncomfortable if a few times I've been a week ahead and I just feel weird. I feel like I'm not in touch with what I'm doing with the audience. So yeah, I think most web cartoonists, I think probably because of that phenomenon, are not ahead on their work. Because there's no reason we should be less ahead than the print people, other than that they're obligated to for legal reasons. So yeah, so basically I don't. Yeah.
So what other webcomic types do you and particularly say admire or despise?
Admire. There are comics that are really good. The ones I like to read, though, are ones I feel like I can learn something from. So, like, one I really like, actually, have you ever read Buttersafe? You guys know that one? Yeah, it's not super popular, but I learned a lot from it. And that I remember, I was talking to Randy from XKCD about this. He was like, yeah, I love Buttersafe because he's always doing big ideas, you know, and that's what's good about it. The problem with doing big ideas and being more artsy is that 9 times out of 10, it's not as fun to read. It's just weird or obscure or whatever it is. But it's nice because now and then he does something that's really nobody else could do, and so or they do, it's 2 guys. And so that's an example of something where it's, in terms of sort of day-to-day reading, it's not my favorite, but I feel like I'm picking up ideas from it. I feel a little that way about XKCD, or at least he sort of paved the way for a lot of sort of nerdy comedy to go mainstream. And I sort of other more obscure comics. Like there's a comic when I was first starting called The Parking Lot is Full. You've read it? Okay, yeah. I think it's been defunct since 2002 or something like that. Yeah, it's been ages, but it's almost hard to appreciate now because webcomics are really developed since those days, but it was so sort of abrasive for a comic. You know, it would be single panels and the captions would like yell at you, the reader. You know, just weird stuff. And it was sort of, you know, even a comic like The Far Side, which broke down a lot of barriers, it's still very traditional. It presents a situation and then elaborates on it a little at the bottom. That's a traditional caption comic. And these were really interesting because they would maybe do something else completely differently or digress from the topic, or we would have a caption that was like this long. And it's kind of the same deal, like maybe you feel the same way with Parking Lot is Full. On a day-to-day basis, maybe it wasn't solid gold, but was really doing new, interesting stuff. And so that's the kind of comic I like. Like I have other comics I really love. Like I love a comic called Amazing Superpowers, but he's kind of in the same space as I am. So I don't feel like we probably couldn't learn from each other. So it wouldn't be sort of much creative use for us to read each other's comics. And then there's, maybe you've read A Lesson is Learned, but The Damage is Irreversible. That was a really good comic. Sort of same deal, really pushing what you could do in a comic. And so that's what I like to read. But I actually don't read that many comics. I read a few, but not too many. Do you have a follow-up question? Oh, okay, good. Do you have a question?
Actually, I have the exact same question.
What software do you use to do the drawing and coloring?
I use nice, but pretty much standard cardstock paper, just regular ream of paper, and then I draw on a non-photographic blue pencil, you know, that doesn't scan, and then I just use a Chrome black ink marker, and then I scan into Photoshop and color. It's really very simple. There's something. I actually, when people ask me, like other artists ask me, I tell them not to do it my way because almost everyone I know does tablets now. I just can't do it. I probably will eventually, but it's just, it feels weird. And the way you have to draw on a tablet, maybe there are tablet masters I haven't met, but like when I want to do a line stroke, I draw it. In a tablet, you have your hand on Control-Z the whole time because you have to draw everything a couple times to get the stroke right. I just, it's not for me. Draw some pictures.
It seems that the webcomic industry is pretty well connected in terms of authors knowing each other.
Oh, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that and
yeah.
what that's like?
Tell us about your weekend.
Yeah. I was actually at a wedding, and Dinosaur Comics was there, and Wondermark was there, and Tomato Co. was there. Questionable Content was there.
So you were in the Happy Valley.
Yes, it was a beautiful place. We actually have a lot of private channels that the webcomic artists do. I was talking to Christine about this. If you you may have, if you've been reading webcomics for a long time, you probably remember up to something like 2007, there was a lot more sort of public fighting and drama between web cartoonists. You know, now there's not much of that. But the reason is because it happens in private. But yeah, it's cool. This will probably go away over the next, say, generation. But right now is a really cool time because we all, everyone who's doing webcomics professionally really knows pretty much everyone else. Because we all go to the same conventions, we share the same data, because we have to run, everyone has a slightly different business model, but it's essentially the same. So it's sort of like, if you want to, like the ad setup I have right now, I got from Chris Hallbeck, who does a comic called Book of Biff, and it's really helpful having that shared pool of knowledge. I think for me, just having his advice on that ad setup has probably over time doubled my income, just doing it properly. And so, yeah, there's just a lot of talk, and pretty much everyone knows each other. And what's really nice is because everyone has sort of bootstrapped their way up to their position, there's no sort of other way to do it, I guess. And so everyone's essentially a small business owner, so there's not a lot of BS with people. And it's easy to be friends when you don't need each other, you know? Everyone's kind of an island in webcomics, and so it's usually very chummy at conventions. There are a few crazy people, but I won't say.
How much time do you have to spend on the businessy side of things, like with the ads?
It's not too bad. Just this year, it was getting pretty. I was getting to where I was like having physiological symptoms from stress and not sleeping this year, and so I finally gave in, and I have 2 people who help me out now. So in terms of store stuff and fulfillment, I have a person who handles all the shipping, order taking. I don't even look at it anymore. And then I have a guy who is more local to me, and he helps out with simple Photoshop jobs and just little stuff, just random things. And so at this point, I would say I at least get to do something like 80 to 90% non-business. I mean, there's stuff that's sort of like when you count like designing stuff in the book or picking comics, you know, it's a little, some of it's iffy, but like the really not fun stuff like mailing and yeah, handling my ad chain, I don't really touch anymore, which is amazing. But I really feel like I think this year has been a much better. I've been much more proud of my work this year, and I think in large part it's because I've had people taking slack. I haven't had to just sort of do something the last minute because I didn't want to. And so yeah, that's been really cool. I think the future of webcomics is going to be that, and this is already sort of forming. There will be something like the old agency system, like the literary agency system in place now. That'll sort of take care of this stuff for you. It hasn't really existed yet, but Red Pig is kind of in that space, and they're the best at it. And Pataco's in that space, and Blind Ferret's in that space now. And my hope is that essentially what will happen is the agency system will basically become what it was originally, just not run by assholes. Which really would make a difference. And what I mean by that is, be specific. The difference between me being at a traditional company and me being with Red Pig, in terms of what my take is and how much control I have, is night and day. So if I were to say be at Random House or something, I would have to, they would be able to tell me to change my cover if they wanted to. They could edit content, make demands about what had to go in. And they would give, just money-wise, a much smaller cut. I think like it's not quite an order of magnitude, but it's in that ballpark. Like I've done traditional publishing, and I probably will never do it again. Because what ends up happening is the only way you can make a living out of it is if you sell something like 100,000 copies, and most people aren't going to do that. Whereas, like I know people who have audiences like under 10,000 people who make a living at it because the cut is good enough and they can handle their own marketing. And so I hope the whole publishing universe is trending this way. It might just be in my little bubble everything is going this way. In the webcomics world it definitely is, but I hope that publishing in general, book publishing and traditional comic book publishing will go that way.
Yeah. How does that tie in with like how Machine of Death went down?
Oh, Machine of Death, that was awesome. If you guys don't know, so Machine of Death, I wasn't involved in this, just to be clear. No, I had no involvement in that project. That was Malky and, but I'm happy to talk about it. I know everything that happened, yeah. It was Malky and Ryan North, Dinosaur Comics and Wondermark. They did a very simple idea for a project. It was, and it's interesting if you think about it in comparison to what a publishing house basically does. They were sort of doing the same thing. They said, we need a bunch of short stories and artwork. We're going to compile it together, and the only thing we're going to do is that every story has to have this theme of a machine that, what was it, it knows when you're going to die?
It tells you how you're.
Tells you how you're going to, that's right. And so every short story, it could be anything, it just had to have this theme in it. And so they actually put together this really good book of stories. But what was really cool is, I'd never seen this done, and we actually ended up doing this with Captain Stupendous, a book I have released, where you, instead of, if you're selling it through Amazon, it's a lot worse if you're selling it through Amazon, you tell everyone don't buy until the day I tell you, and then you can run up the numbers exactly. So they actually hit #1 for one day, which was extra cool because they displaced Glenn Beck for one day. And Glenn Beck, this is true, actually went on TV and said there's this book called Machine of Death, and it's the liberal culture of death at work. And which was, of course, stupid because they sold so many books after that. You know, everyone was like, "It'll piss off Glenn Beck. This is great." And yeah, that was a really good example of how just by having a good relationship with your audience. Like, think about it this way: like, if you were doing Batman, you might not be able to pull that off because Ryan North can directly talk to 50,000 people, and Malky can too. And so, if you could just mobilize 10,000 people to do the same thing at the same time, you can get really cool results. Whereas something like Batman doesn't have that personal relationship. You read it because you want to know what Batman's up to. You don't care. Well, you probably care who the author is, but not in the same way you do with dinosaur comics, where you kind of feel like you know the guy, you know. And that's one of the cool things that webcomics can do. That I think a lot of the older companies are now clumsily trying to get into that universe. But I actually hope they succeed because it makes everything more fun. You know, when you can interact with all these people. Yeah.
So how do you decide what fraction of your time to spend on all of your different projects?
It's actually, like I was saying earlier, the equation isn't simple in the sense that you sort of can follow the fields, so to speak. So the part of your brain that does calculus is not the part of your brain that writes dirty jokes. And so for me, what I try to do is I'll work on something till I'm about tired of it. You know, unless I'm on a deadline, then I have to make things work. But if I'll work on calculus until I just can't take it anymore. And it's actually good because, you know, calculus, it's very logical, it's very rigorous, it's very step by step, whereas doing comics is sort of the opposite. So, so what I've done when I'm being good is I actually have a sort of daily schedule that says, you know, from 9 to 11, I think it's 9 to 11 you'll do math, and then from 11 to 12, or like 11 to 11:30 try to write 3 jokes, and then from 11:30 to 12:30, I don't know, I'd have to pull my schedule, but yeah, I stole the idea from Ben Franklin. It was in his autobiography. He had this book. He was like, I'm too lazy, I have to do more stuff, so he scheduled his whole life out. And it really, you don't realize how much time you're spending poking around the internet until you schedule your life, and it's amazing how much you can get done in 16 hours if you are not doing anything else. Yeah. It's also, because it's fun, it's not so bad. You know, I do work constantly. It's also good because my wife is also crazy about her work, so there's no sort of awkwardness or no, you know, why don't we go out more often? It's usually, by the time we go out, we both want it, you know? And so that's been really nice. I honestly don't know what I would do if I were with someone who wanted me to take her out on weekends. But yeah, it's, more often than not, I want to go out before she does. Yeah.
Who are the people who do SMBC theater? Are they just your friends, or how did you meet them?
So James, the other guy who writes, I've known him since high school. He's actually one of the characters in my old comic strip. And we, for ages, wanted to do like video projects, and then it just happened that there was sort of a nice situation where I had built up a little audience and had a tiny amount of disposable income I could put towards some new project. And then he had just moved to LA. He's a graduate of the Carnegie Mellon screenwriting program, and which meant he had this network of people for us to abuse. And so it was cool because I could sort of finance this and do the publicity and of course help with the writing, and then he was able to bring almost all of our actors are alumni of that program, and which is actually nice because they bring more people because they have this just crazy network of people. So it was very rare that we were wanting for actors or actresses once we got going, which which is really cool since we only pay a few people. We only pay people who are doing technical work, like work you just cannot get away with not paying. But most actors are willing to work for free on publicity stuff, and so we help them with their reels when they want to put that together. And I do believe in paying people, but we weren't making a profit, so you just suit your budget to the budget of the company. It makes sense. Yeah, most of the people who were through that network of people. We had a few people we just sort of found through a friend of a friend of a friend, but yeah, mostly it's you graduate students. Oddly enough. Yeah. Yeah.
You ever worry you're getting typecast? Or James, especially James.
You play Jesus a lot.
No. I was really sad when I had to do it when I didn't have long hair because I had to get a wig. It was like, I know, it was embarrassing.
That's why you got long hair now.
I know, yeah. Well, we actually, we're moving on to this new project now where we have a bunch of SMBC theaters still in the queue that we're still editing together to put out. But I don't love acting. I sort of enjoy it while I'm there, but comics are awesome because it's, on a good day, it's in the morning I have a good idea, that evening I go home and I draw it, and it's this whole little universe of an idea that I show to people, and it probably takes me, even that crazy one, like the 57 panel one, it was like 8 hours. It was a long time, but it wasn't crazy, whereas acting in a video is an entire day of your life, and that doesn't count the writing or anything, and then you won't see the product of it for a month, and it's just the input-output ratio is not great. And so I'm trying to get more into the backseat of everything and help with the writing and make creative choices, but not much on-screen stuff. So it got to where I always live in college towns because I follow my wife's research, and it got to where I couldn't walk around campus because people know what I look like now. And so I was like, if you ever were in Davis, California, and saw a guy like wearing a scarf and a hat in the summer, that was me. But I don't have a problem meeting people. It's just I was going to get work done, and if I get stopped every 20 minutes to talk to someone, it got pretty awkward after a while. And it kind of throws off your conversation to have someone you don't know yell your name all of a sudden. But it's cool too. This is cool. Kelly and I were walking home just from the library, just chit-chatting. A guy walks by, does not break his gait, just keeps walking. As he goes, he shouts, "You rock!" And that was okay. If every interaction was like that, I could do it. But yeah, I'm not worried about typecasting because I don't want to be an actor. Perhaps James should worry. He definitely wants to. But I mean, we're hoping to be in a position where we control the production, so if he felt he was typecast, he could write himself a new character who was dashing and heroic. Yeah.
So what's the most interesting or the most famous person you've interacted with via somebody randomly knowing that you're a webcomic?
I've had two really awesome interactions. The best one I ever had was I didn't get to meet him, but I did this comic once that was about time travel. The joke was about a guy who wants to meet all the time travelers, so he has the best party ever, and then everyone comes at the same time, so there's sort of a singularity that kills everyone who would ever want to time travel, and that's why time travel is impossible. And so just whenever I have a scientist character and it makes sense to, I will just pick a scientist I actually really like and put them in as the character. So I had Kip Thorne, who maybe you know is a famous physicist. He has his name on an equation or a theory with Stephen Hawking, so he did all right for himself. And he's still at Caltech, he still works, and I think he's probably in his 70s or 80s, but so I'd done this comic and just didn't think of anything of it, because when I do younger people, I expect maybe they'll get in touch with me because they might hear about it, but Kip Thorne doesn't need to care about comics. And, thinks no one needs to care about comics. But then I feel like it was his 70th or 80th birthday, someone had printed this up and they put it out for him, and it was like at Kip Thorne's birthday party. It was the coolest thing ever. And then he sent me a letter. It wasn't like a personal like I love you. That would have been cool. But it was just like I really appreciated your comic. This sort of signed Kip Thorne. I was like, this I just don't deserve this at all. This is ludicrous. Yeah. That was really amazing. It was especially good because it was my dad graduated with his PhD from Caltech, and so I could be like, guess who I got a letter from? I wonder if you knew him. So I triangulated between my dad and Kip Thorne to see if they'd ever passed each other in the hallways, and we couldn't figure out that they had, sadly. But it's almost certain they did, which was just kind of neat. The other cool thing was I was at Comic-Con, this was like 2 years ago, and I was talking to Phil Plait, maybe he does the Bad Astronomy blog, and we're like lame internet buddies. It's really precious.
Awesome.
Yeah. I probably shouldn't tell us. He has a filthy sense of humor in person. Just disgusting. He can't do it publicly, so I get all of it. And, don't tell him I said that. But he's really cool, and so he, as you know, he's really into a lot of media stuff, and so he actually came by my booth, and we just were chit-chatting, because I think it was the first time we'd met in person, and just like at the exact same moment, Will Wheaton came up to be like, "I love your comics," and I was like, "This is the greatest thing." And so there's actually a photo of me and Will Wheaton and Phil Plait making faces at a camera, and then there's a guy who photobombed it, which is really weird. Especially because Phil was actively trying to photobomb his own photo, and then this guy totally one-upped him. But that was really cool, just from a nerd standpoint. Like the Kip Thorne thing was actually sort of gratifying in a self-actualization sort of way. But Will Wheaton and Phil Plait was just dorking out. It was awesome, and at Comic-Con no less. So yeah. I would say those are my two favorite interactions. I've had like awkward interactions, but nothing to be proud of.
Yeah, there's one comic in here, I can't find it again, which I believe had Neil deGrasse Tyson and Phil Plait in the volume.
Yeah, I haven't reached Neil deGrasse. It's become my way to. If I hear about someone and I think they're cool, I can touch base with them by doing a comic. It's everyone likes to be drawn, and I haven't got Neil deGrasse Tyson. I've done 2 comics about him. He won't get in touch with me. We should be best friends. It's actually been nice. I've had times when Kip Thorne's the best example. I've had other professors I've met just through the comics, and then I can be like, I was having trouble with my physics homework. Could you help me with this? I actually did that once. A friend of mine, Sean Carroll, he wrote a book called From Eternity to Here, and he does a blog called Cosmic Variance, maybe you've read it. Yeah. And when I was just first learning physics, he was a fan of the comic, and now and then I would have a problem. I would never ask him, solve this equation for me, because he's a professor at Caltech. That might be rude. But I would be like, hey, I really can't understand this concept. Could you help me with it? He would actually, it was really nice. He would write paragraphs to me. It was really cool. And so that's been one of the really nice sort of unexpected side effects of doing cartoons. And what's really cool too, similarly, is if I'm learning something in math and I have trouble with a definition or a problem or something, I'll push it on Twitter and I will get 18 answers in 10 seconds. It's really amazing. Yeah.
How many of them are correct?
That is the problem. What's more interesting is usually it's like 90% correct. There are people who are wrong, but what's really interesting is you will ask a question and you will say, why is this so? I'll give you an example I did recently. I was doing these calculus blogs, and what's nice about it is I'm sort of figuring out all the things I never actually learned but felt like I knew. So as you probably remember from a long time ago, inverse trigonometric functions have a restricted domain. It's very reasonable to make a restricted domain because otherwise the math doesn't work. But you suspect there must be a sort of intuitive reason why this might be the case. And so I went to Twitter and I said, could anyone, so I of course I understood why you restrict the domain for the math part. That's the obvious part. Everyone understands that instantly. But why should it be in a sort of human intuitive way? And so I go to Twitter and I'm like, hey, could anyone give me any insight on this? And instantly it was 40 people saying, well, you have to restrict the domain so the math works. And I was like, that's kind of boggling, because that means that most of the people who are interacting with this type of math are not even trying to sort of have a deeper understanding of it. But I got a couple of people who gave me better ways to understand how it would work. And actually, the best version of it I read, and there were a couple of them, was if you imagine a non-inverted trig function, or non-inverse trig function, it also has a restricted range because of where it can go. So I thought that was the best way to think of it, if you think of inverting it. And so it was neat to think about how, or it was maybe scary to think about how many people who are actually using this math don't have I guess what I would call an understanding of it. They have sort of a pragmatic understanding, which is probably enough, but in terms of insight, it didn't. But that's what's cool about Twitter. Again, I was able to instantly, despite all the other people telling me I was stupid, get some really cool insights. So yeah. Yeah.
I know you guys were thinking of like taking SMB theater and doing something bigger with it. What's the news on that?
What we're doing, James wrote I was involved in it, mostly doing punch-up, like fixing jokes and rearranging structure stuff, but he wrote the script. It's sort of a science fiction-y, I don't know how to say it, it's like a comedy science fiction sitcom. I don't want to say sitcom because that makes it sound like the jokes are in any way tame, but it's written by James, so it's just horrifying. And so that's the main thing we're working on, and that's what the bulk of the Kickstarter money is going to. We since we went so over, we're going to try to sort of reward the people who took us above and beyond by working on some additional projects that we can give them basically for no Kickstarter money, or well, for their money, but for money they were intending to go to this thing that we can already do on a smaller budget. And so we have a couple of other things in the pipe, but nothing that's sort of developed enough that's worth talking about. I have a couple other projects. Like I was saying, I'm working on a Choose Your Own Adventure. I have a couple of book projects I'm doing, but which maybe at some point will get adapted into something we do production-wise. But right now our big focus is on the science fiction thing. Yeah, pretty fun.
Wait, were you the terrible temp agency Choose Your Own Adventure thing, or no?
No, I've never done one.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm actually doing, Christine and I were talking about this, there's a lot of weird math that goes into designing a Choose Your Own Adventure, like the flow charting and because because I knew this math and I completely screwed it up, I started, the way I've been doing it is I sort of flow chart in the abstract what a story should be like, and then I assign stuff to the scenes. And if you want to have a bridge, a fork at every point, if you want to have a choice at every point, you have to, it's 2 to the n plus 2 to the n plus, or 2 to the n plus 1 plus 2 to the n plus 1 plus 1. So by the time you've gotten to 2 to the 10th, which is to say you've only read 10 scenes, you have something like 1,500 scenes you have to write to make the reader able to do that, right? So you have to figure out a reasonable but still fun way to clip. So the cool thing is if you clip at a branch, you clip off 2 to the n from that point, right? 2 to the n plus 2 to the n plus 1 from that point, right? And so on. And so it's not as scary if you just learn how to clip judiciously. But so it's an interesting thing, and you can look at flowcharts and you can tell the genre. I don't mean genre like whether it's a Western or not, but the genre of whether it's what type of story they're telling from just looking at the flowchart. So like the old Choose Your Own Adventure you read when you were 12, the little simple one that actually says Choose Your Own Adventure on the top, the flowchart, you could make it sort of fan out in every direction, because there are lots of short stories with choices. In fact, it might even be 2 to the n plus 2 to the n plus 1 and so on, because you really basically have a simple fork at each point, and to get to the end might only be 10 steps, and the way you play this is you try to do all the different routes, right? And whereas, if you looked at the flowchart, it would either look like that or it would look like a fat triangle, right? Whereas if it was a game book, I don't know if you played gaming, Choose Your Own Adventure, there's sort of a slightly different genre where you can sort of interact with your setting, you can fight stuff, or you can pick up things. It's kind of like D&D for one. I think Steve Jackson Games did a couple. There's a very popular one called
If you picked up the sword 3 steps ago, then
it's exactly like that, yeah. And what's interesting though is to make that work, you have to have a much more linear flow because you're telling one story, right? And also, if it's stuff like you have to have the sword to kill the whatever, you have to actually get the sword, otherwise you've read 200 pages for no reason. So you have to do a much more linear story, and it has to pinch at points, right, so that you get the central storyline. So you can actually tell by looking, it'll have to be linear, and there'll have to be pinching points. So it's really been a cool learning experience working on Choose Your Own Adventure, oddly enough. But which will hopefully be after Bread Pig in March. Yeah, am I out of time?
I think we're running out of time, yeah.
Cool, thank you guys.